Hey, welcome back. So we've seen how to define a class with instance attributes and instance methods. Then we saw how to use class attributes. So the next logical step is to see class methods. And I'll start off by saying that these are actually pretty rare in the wild. They're not all that commonly used. Instance methods are used by far more often, like 50, maybe 100 times as often, in my experience at least. Most of the stuff you'll be writing are instance methods. But with that said, it's good that you know how to write a class method, and you'll know how to recognize one if you see it on something else that you didn't write. So let's just dive into it. Class methods are methods that are not concerned with specific instances, but with the class itself. So just like a class attribute is not concerned with the individual, specifics of a given instance of that class, it's concerned with the class itself. Same thing with class methods. And because of this, they're a lot less commonly used and frankly less useful. But sometimes there's some functionality that doesn't care about the instances. It doesn't matter about the specifics of a given user or a given pet or card deck or poker hand. And it's concerned with the whole concept of a poker hand or a user. And so that could go on the class. So I'll show you an example. Before we go any further, you might have noticed I skipped this little parenthetical here when I was reading it out loud. So class methods are methods with the @class method decorator. So we haven't talked about decorators yet. Basically, all I'll say about it for now, it's a little bit of Python magic, syntactic sugar is what people would call it, that goes in front of a class method. So this here is a class method. Don't worry about what it does. But notice that this @class method is on the line in front of it or before it, and that signifies that the next method is actually a class method, not an instance method. So by default, to make something an instance method, we don't do anything special because they're just so much more commonly used. It made sense to make that the default. And when you do need a class method, you preface it with @class method, just like this. In a bit, we'll actually learn how to define our own decorators. This is a decorator here, and you'll come to understand how this works and what it's doing behind the scenes. For now, though, let's just consider it Python magic that makes this a class method. Okay, so let's actually define our own. Here I have that same user class we've been working with. I just made a new file called classmethods.py and copied this in. So I'm going to show you two examples of class methods. The first is going to be a simpler example that's not all that realistic, and the second is going to be a more common use case for class methods, but it's a little harder to grasp. So I'm going to start with the basic one. We have this class attribute, active users. We could define a method that would just return a little statement that says how many active users there are at any given time. So first up, let's talk about where to define class methods. There's not actually a standard, like for many other things. These magic methods, the dunder methods, should go up top. They don't have to, but they should. And that's kind of accepted as common and convention. With class methods, there isn't an equivalent style. So it's up to you, but you should just be consistent. For now, just because these files are educational, I'm going to put the new stuff up top so you don't have to scroll to the bottom to see any of the new class methods. But that's not me saying that every class method should go at the top of every class. Okay, so we could define a class method. We start with this. Class method @class method decorator, and then we define the name of the function or the method. And let's just call this one display active users or something. And the thing about class methods, automatically the class is going to be passed in to this method whenever we call it. So rather than self, just like down here, Python automatically passes in the instance of the user and calls it self as a parameter. Here, we could name this self. Remember, the name doesn't actually matter, but the standard is to go with CLS for class. So this signifies to us that what we'll be working with inside of this method is not an instance, it's the actual class. So if I just did a print CLS here, we'll actually see that CLS is the class user, not an instance of user. So let me just show you that now. To call class methods, let's go down. I have two users. I can call user1 dot, what do we call that? Display active users. But I also can do user.display, capital U, user. And that's what I prefer because it makes it clear that we're calling a class method. It has nothing to do with this instance. So we can technically do this, and well, I'll show you both. Let's start with this one. Just print user, display active users. I need parens, of course, to execute it. And there you go. You can see that CLS, the parameter, what was passed in was the actual class user. It's not an instance. We don't see that whole object ID thing with all those numbers afterwards like we would if we printed self out. And just to show you, we can do the exact same thing. I actually don't need to print this because I'm calling print in there. If I execute it now, we get the same thing. So either syntax to call it, we can call the instance dot class method or the class name dot class method. Either way, because we defined it as a class method, the class will be the first argument that's passed in this case, user. So as far as some functionality here, we could just do a return, do an f string, and we'll just return how many users there are. So we'll say something like there are, whoops, I don't want that inside those braces. There are currently, and then in the braces, we'll reference cls.activeUsers, just like that. And after that, what do we want? Let's say active users. There are currently 3 active users, something like that. So now to print that, comment that out or delete that, we'll make 2 users, and now we can just do user.displayActiveUsers. We need to print the whole thing. And then let's do it twice and make 2 more users afterwards. And before I forget, we need parens to execute that. And if we call it now, we get there are currently 2 active users, then we created 2 more users, then there are currently 4 active users. So that is a very simple class method. It could be a class method in this case because it doesn't rely on any information that's particular to an instance.